What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video and to another week of Loki. This episode was titled Journey into Mystery, and I cannot believe that we're already down to only having one episode left. And I think I can safely say that Loki has actually been my favorite of the MCU series that we've gotten so far. I've loved them all so far, but yeah, I think, obviously that can change with next week's episode, but I think this is the one that's definitely pulling on my heartstrings the most and really getting me engaged in the narrative. And ultimately, I'm walking away from this one just thinking, I really hope we get more Loki. I don't know how they're going to go about it. I do have an idea about how they may go about it in the future based on this episode, but yeah, I really hope we get more Loki because Tom Hiddleston is just so great, and this show in general has just kind of reinvigorated my love for Loki. Not to say that I didn't enjoy the character before. I've always enjoyed him in the comic books and in the video games and, the animated stuff, so I've always loved him in the MCU as well. But yeah, I never really got that full-blown character development that I always wanted to see from this version of Loki. Don't get me wrong, he had his moments for sure, without a doubt, but yeah, being able to have this show now that lets Tom Hiddleston really give this character a lot more depth, which of course leads us to praising the creative team of this show, Kevin Feige and everybody at Marvel Studios who's a part of making this what it is. But yeah, just being able to see the blend of great writing and a great performer in the lead role is just always a great time. And yeah, again, this has just kind of reinvigorated my love for Loki. Tom Hiddleston's great in this show, and so is everybody else. What I'm really loving about this show, and I should also mention really quickly, jumping into spoilers, won't be a full breakdown of everything that happened, but just gonna get into spoilers on my thoughts on the episode. Yeah, what I love about the show is that the performances are so strong. Whether it's Tom Hiddleston, Sophia DiMartino, Owen Wilson, and Richard E. Grant, who's in this episode, it's just craziness. So let's hop into what happened in this episode. In last week's episode, essentially the biggest things to kind of talk about is we learned that the TVA is not what we thought it was, which we pretty much knew that's what it was going to be. It turns out that the Time Lords were these androids, these robots that were there, and not exactly what we all thought they were going to be, these actual three entities that control the timeline, which even led some of the people who were part of the TVA to start doubting their life. You have Hunter B-15, who, due to her enchantment from Sylvie, now knows that this is all a lie, and so she's been locked up. We see her locked up in this episode. You have Owen Wilson's character, Mobius, who was sent to the Void, as we're going to talk about in just one moment, as he was pruned, similar to Loki. And then you have Judge Renslayer, who is struggling in this episode with trying to be the leader, trying to be somebody who's trying to keep charge of the TVA, while also trying to figure out what's going on, because she also feels like she's been lied to. Of course, she wants to find out what's really happening with the TVA, but she's still being a bit of an ass. So I'm very curious to see where they take that moving forward. But ultimately, this episode primarily focuses on Loki and the other Lokis in the Void, a time at the very end of time itself where everything kind of collides and then just ends, or at least that's what Judge Renslayer tells Sylvie before she prunes herself and heads over there. At the end of last week's episode, again, Loki was pruned, and during the post-credit scene or the mid-credit scene, we see that he is being greeted in this place called the Void by three other Lokis. I'm sorry, actually four different Lokis. You have the older Loki, you have this black gentleman who's a Loki as well, you have Kid Loki, and then you have the alligator Loki, which was kind of hilarious throughout the course of this episode. But it was great to see Richard E. Grant as the classic Loki in the classic Loki outfit. I love that this show and a lot of these other MCU shows have been able to start to kind of dip their toes into, in a funny way, bringing out these classic costumes that just don't work for the big screen. But yeah, seeing Richard E. Grant in this episode playing classic Loki, perfect casting. I mean, he's just great. He just completely, gives himself to the performance and just has a lot of fun with it, and that's something I love about him overall as an actor. But I love that about everybody in this show. Everybody's just going for it. So yeah, we find that Mobius is there. Sylvie is now there because she's pruned herself. She ends up getting saved by Mobius, and man, I love Owen Wilson as Mobius. He's just so good as the character. I really enjoy the heart he brings to the character, and ultimately every time he's on screen, I'm really engaged in what's happening. Really thoroughly enjoy Owen Wilson in general. He's a great actor, but man, if you would have told me 10 years ago that he's going to be in the MCU as a really lovable, likable character that's going to be part of this crazy time travel narrative, I wouldn't have believed you. And just to be able to see it come to fruition in the way that it has is just awesome. But yeah, a majority of this episode is spent with Loki getting to know his other Lokis. We also meet some more Lokis that essentially are all just kind of crazy and bad. We even see one of those get their hand bitten off by the alligator Loki earlier in the episode. And yeah, this episode is filled with laughs and just moments where you're smiling and you're engaging in what's happening with the characters. I could probably say this is my favorite episode in the series, though, so far. It's got that great blend of fun action, humor, and just a great, pushing of the narrative that I really thoroughly enjoyed. Ultimately, the heart of this episode really lies with Loki and Sylvie deciding to enchant the big creature that's destroying everything in the void that's called Alioth. A big smoke creature with like a skeletal animal face that just devours anything that's sent to the void that's pruned from other timelines by the TVA. And so, yeah, very, very curious to see what ends up happening, because the episode actually ends with Loki and Sylvie working together to enchant this big creature, which ends up kind of opening some sort of portal where we see that there is some sort of building that looks like it's in the middle of time and space itself. And so I'm very, very curious to see what ends up happening there. As I walked into the show, I mentioned that this is one thing that I'm not super familiar with when it comes to Marvel, and that's always a great thing, because I grew up as a longtime comic book fan and I've kept up with a lot of it, and watching tons of the animated stuff. If you're like me, a lot of times when you go into these movies, you know what's going to happen. You see a character, you know what their arc's going to be, you know who they're going to become, especially in the MCU when they trickle people's names here and there. You already know, okay, that person they just introduced is going to become this character. And for the casual viewer, they may not know that, but for me, it's always kind of an expected thing. So it's nice to have things like this, or for instance, the Eternals that are coming up, that are just things that I'm not overly familiar with, and I can just kind of sit back and be surprised by what's happening. And this has definitely just been a great time letting that happen with this show. So yeah, I'm really, really enjoying Loki so far. Love the action, love the visuals, love the performances, really loving the chemistry between Tom Hiddleston and Sophia DiMartino. She's just great. I really hope we get more of her after the show. And I mentioned earlier in the video that I feel like there's going to be a way for us to get more Loki in the future, and that has mainly to do with a line of dialogue that came from Richard E. Grant's version of Loki, where he pretty much stated that the reason that he was ever captured by the TVA was that when he went up against Thanos in Infinity War, as we see where Loki actually ends up dying, he actually just gave Thanos a copy of himself. He hid away and then escaped off to a planet to live alone. So a part of me is hoping that this Loki that we know, our Loki, will do the same. My best guess is when this show is over, that he's going to return back to the events of 2012's Avengers, because that all still needs to happen, like they're going to still kind of reset him. He's going to be reset in some way. I don't know if that's exactly what's going to happen, because I honestly genuinely don't know what the hell is going to happen. But my guess would be that that's what's going to happen, and that he's going to get all the way up to that event of Infinity War and do what Richard E. Grant told him. But now the TVA won't be around to stop any sort of Nexus event, and he can maybe live out a life. Maybe him and Sylvie will go live a life out somewhere on a planet alone, and that'll eventually kind of bring them into the Thor movies later on, and who knows? Very, very curious. But this episode is also littered with Easter eggs and references here and there, especially in the void in the background. You can see one of the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarriers. You can see the ship that Ronan the Accuser and Thanos ride around in. There's also a really awesome moment where Kid Loki mentions that the reason that he was ever found by the TVA was because he killed Thor, which is awesome. And as we go down to their lair underground, it kind of shows us the dirt and what's in there, and we see Mjolnir, or well, I can't really know how to pronounce it perfectly, but Thor's hammer, and we also see Thor inside of that containment thing that he was in Avengers when Loki sends him down plummeting to the earth, except he's like minimized and he's just in there trying to bounce out. So this episode was just filled with little fun, little silly moments. And what I love about this show, and something like WandaVision too, is that these premises have allowed for just bizarre storytelling, bizarre visual storytelling as well, and just something that's just expanding the narrative and just getting crazy and wacky. And I love that. I love that Falcon and the Winter Soldier was a little bit more traditional MCU, but I love that this show and WandaVision have just been so different and so awesome. So yeah, like I said, the episode ends with Loki and Sylvie enchanting Alioth, this big creature, and we see it open up, the smoke clears, and there's some sort of building that looks like it's in the middle of space, and obviously there's something weird's going on there, but very, very curious to see what that episode ends up turning out to be like. And I definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. If there's anything in here that I didn't mention, because this episode is jam-packed and this isn't a full breakdown, please comment about it down below and we can have a discussion. Big thanks to you guys for watching. Very, very excited to see how this show kind of plays out in the final episode. But like I said, I think this may be my favorite of the MCU shows. And yeah, really quickly, I just want to tag this on here at the end for anybody who got this far into the video. I put a poll up recently saying that I'm kind of debating whether or not I want to continue doing these weekly spoiler reviews for various shows on Disney Plus. I'm thinking of primarily only doing it for Star Wars and Marvel. Monsters at Work also starts tonight, and that's going to be the first show on Disney Plus that I'm just going to watch week to week and then do one big series review at the end, maybe a spoiler video as well, but probably just one big series review. And I'm considering doing the same for future MCU shows and Star Wars shows. So if you guys are watching this, if you guys can give me a little bit of feedback, the poll has not been super helpful because it's been pretty even. And the last time I checked, both the votes for stopping that kind of videos, these kind of videos, and the poll for, or the vote for continuing to make videos like this, they're at the exact same level. So I definitely just want to get a little bit more feedback on moving forward, because obviously I enjoy doing these videos, but if nobody's really watching or if people aren't as interested, I don't want to continue doing them as much. So big thanks to you guys for watching. Can't wait to hear your thoughts on this episode of Loki. Please, if you're new here to the channel, hit that subscribe button, stick around. Tons of great content on here, weekly content every week, and well, that's what weekly content means. And please, like button, comment your thoughts, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, bye bye.